There is a version of being smart that most people never receive credit for. It does not look like the confident, well-organized, clearly spoken intelligence that gets recognized in schools and boardrooms and job interviews. It looks stranger than that. It looks like someone who asks questions that make conversations uncomfortable, who becomes inexplicably preoccupied with things that have no practical relevance to their actual life, who feels, with a consistency they have learned not to mention in polite company, that they are slightly outside the world they are observing rather than inside it, who thinks too much, feels too much, notices too much, and has been told, in various configurations over the course of their life, that all of this is somewhat excessive. What psychology has been quietly documenting is that the behaviors most consistently described as strange, as too much, as out of step, these are not arbitrary quirks. They are the behavioral signatures of minds that process the world more deeply than average, not more accurately in every case, not more usefully in every case, but more thoroughly, more continuously, with a higher ratio of internal processing to external output that almost always appears, from the outside, as something other than what it actually is. The relationship between intelligence and perceived oddness is not coincidental, it is structural, because the mind that processes more has more to manage, more input, more association, more simultaneous processing of patterns and exceptions and questions, and the behaviors that result from managing all of that are simply not what ordinary social life is calibrated to accommodate. These are the behaviors worth understanding, not as validation that everyone who recognizes themselves in them is a secret genius, but as an honest account of what these behaviors actually are and why they so consistently appear in the people whose depth of thinking exceeds what their surface comfortably displays. The first is the habit of asking questions that nobody else seems to want to ask, not questions born from ignorance, questions born from the refusal to accept a surface-level answer as complete. The question beneath the question, the follow-up that arrives after everyone else has accepted the explanation and moved on. This behavior is routinely experienced by the people around it as disruptive as overthinking, as complicating things that don't need to be complicated, as a failure to just accept and move forward. What it actually is, in the language of research on intellectual curiosity, is epistemic humility in action. The recognition that most available explanations are partial, that most accepted frameworks have limits, and that the interesting work happens at the edge of what is currently understood, rather than at its center. Studies linking curiosity to cognitive outcomes are unambiguous. Curious people not only learn faster, they retain more, make more creative connections, and demonstrate greater cognitive flexibility under novel conditions. The person who keeps asking is not being difficult. They are exactly what the intellectual process requires. Someone who treats knowledge as provisional and keeps pushing past the point where others are satisfied. The second behavior is the specific quality of feeling like a perpetual observer rather than a participant. Not social anxiety, something more structural than that. A sense of being slightly outside the scene you are physically occupying, of watching the social dynamics unfold with a simultaneity of engagement and analysis that makes full immersion genuinely difficult. This is described by many people as a form of alienation. What it actually is, in most cases, is heightened metacognitive awareness, the ongoing background monitoring of one's own thinking and social processing that characterizes minds with high general intelligence. The research on this is consistent across cultures. People who score higher on measures of general cognitive ability report more frequent experiences of social observation, of noticing the patterns in group behavior, the unspoken dynamics, the gap between what people are saying and what is actually being communicated. They are not alienated from people. They are processing people at a level that makes unself-conscious participation harder. And what looks like distance from the outside is, from the inside, a form of attention that most people never deploy. If this is landing somewhere in you, take a moment to like the video. It helps more people find conversations like this one. And if understanding the psychology behind the behaviors that have always made you feel slightly different from the people around you is something you want more of, subscribing makes that work possible. The third behavior is the experience of being genuinely moved, sometimes to the point of visible emotional response, by things that most people experience as ordinary. A piece of music that lands somewhere physical. A film that stays inside the body for days. A single sentence in a book that requires stopping. This is sometimes described as being too sensitive, or too emotional, labels that carry an implicit suggestion that the appropriate response to most things is less than what this person is producing. What is actually happening has been documented by researchers studying what is called aesthetic sensitivity, a dimension of openness to experience that is consistently linked to both higher general intelligence and more active default mode network processing. The mind that connects more also feels more because what is being felt is not just the object but its entire associative field, its relationship to everything already known and felt, the meaning it activates that goes beyond its literal content. The fourth behavior is the tendency to think in unusual combinations, to find relevance between things that have no obvious shared category. A conversation about cooking that suddenly illuminates a problem in the workplace. A principle from biology that turns out to describe something in psychology. A pattern noticed in one context that immediately generates a hypothesis about a completely different one. This cross-domain thinking is, by most measures, one of the most reliable indicators of high creative intelligence. And it is consistently experienced by those who do it as something close to inability. The mind that won't stay in its designated lane, that keeps finding connections between things that aren't supposed to be connected. The neuroscience of insight documents that this kind of connection making is associated with unusually high levels of remote, associative thinking, the capacity to identify non-obvious relationships between distantly connected concepts. It is the cognitive mechanism behind both genuine creative achievement and the experience of finding everything slightly more connected than most people around you seem to find it. Here is the paradox that holds all four of these behaviors together, and that makes the experience of carrying them so specifically and so persistently difficult. The behaviors that mark a person as subtly out of step with the expectations of ordinary social and intellectual life are not the product of deficiency. They are the product of excess, of more processing, more association, more simultaneous awareness of complexity and connection than the environment typically makes room for. And the social feedback these behaviors generate too much, too intense, too strange. Overthinking lands on people who are already running higher than average cognitive loads as an additional signal to manage. The signal that the way their mind works is, apparently, not quite right. It is not that, it is not right. It is not average. And average is the standard that most social environments are unconsciously optimizing for. The behaviors that deviate from average are not deviations from correctness. They are deviations from what is most common. And what is most common, and what is most capable of doing, the interesting things are not, in most domains, the same category. You were not built to process the world at the speed and depth most comfortable for the people around you, and the effort required to pretend otherwise is part of what you have been calling your strangeness. It was never that. It was always the cost of operating at a different level in an environment calibrated for something else. Which of these behaviors have you spent the most time treating as a problem to be managed, and what do you think you might have produced if you'd been told earlier that it wasn't a problem at all? Hit the like and subscribe button, and I'll see you in the next one.